Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to be exploring some pretty thought-provoking stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We're looking at a unique perspective on like religion and just the whole idea of existence, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, you listeners, you wanted something that really makes you think, and we think we found it. Have you ever heard of NORMeOli?
It's not
Uh,
exactly a household name, but what makes NORMeOli so fascinating is how they just take a completely different approach to these like age-old debates between atheists and religious folks.
Totally.
Yeah.
We're working with excerpts from NORMeOli's own writing. It's called NORMeOli, and we've also got a collection of their answers from Quora. It's wild, like a mix of New Testament ideas, but reinterpreted and like responses to random people's questions online. It sparked some serious debate.
Yeah, it really has. I mean, NORMeOli just goes right into those atheist arguments, but
Yeah.
at the same time, they're like critiquing traditional religious interpretations too. And then on top of all that, they somehow blend in this whole simulation theory of reality.
That's where things get really interesting.
It definitely does.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out, like, are NORMeOli's arguments strong enough to make both atheists and like the more traditional religious folks kind of reconsider their views?
Right. Could this be like a new way through this debate that's been going on forever? I think to answer that, we got to start with the basics.
Yeah.
What are the core principles of NORMeOli's philosophy? What are the things that really challenge the way we usually think about these things?
Okay, let's break this down. So from what I've gathered, NORMeOli believes that the purpose of human existence is to like fix this sinful condition we're all in.
Yeah.
But here's the twist. It's not something we inherited.
Oh, interesting.
They think it started in a precursory existence, like way before we were even born into this world.
Whoa, that's a really different way to look at original sin. Not about Adam and Eve's guilt, but dealing with stuff we did in a past life. Talk about taking responsibility.
Exactly. And it goes even deeper than just a past life. This sinful condition ties directly into NORMeOli's view of reality itself, and that's where the simulation theory kicks in.
Yeah, yes, the simulation.
NORMeOli describes reality as this trap of simulation and materialism that's like designed to evaluate our souls.
Like a cosmic test.
Right. And the way we choose to live, like whether we're more aligned with love or selfishness, that determines what ultimately happens to us.
Okay, now that's a framework that really throws a wrench in both the atheist and the traditional religious viewpoints.
For sure.
You've got atheists who struggle with any kind of creator or purpose, right? Then you've got religions that are all about faith and dogma. NORMeOli's like proposing a third option, faith but rooted in personal responsibility and like in line with what science is telling us.
Okay, so let's get into how NORMeOli actually addresses the criticisms from both sides.
Right.
Let's start with the atheist materialist perspective.
Sounds good.
So one of the most common questions you hear is, if God is perfect, why did he create an imperfect world? Like, how do you explain all the evil and suffering? How does NORMeOli handle that?
Well, instead of trying to explain suffering away, NORMeOli makes it a central part of their whole philosophy. They say the world's imperfection is intentional. Like, it's not a mistake. It's the whole point. This life with all its problems, it's a test. A place where we can show our true selves by choosing love even when things are tough.
So it's not about blaming God for the state of the world, but seeing that suffering serves a purpose in this grand cosmic scheme.
Right, exactly.
But does that really answer the atheist question? Does it make them doubt their position at all?
It's really hard to say, some atheists might appreciate that NORMeOli is at least trying to deal with the problem of evil head on.
Yeah.
Others might just see it as a cop-out, a way to avoid dealing with the real issue. It all depends on the person and how open they are to considering different perspectives.
All right, let's look at another challenge atheists often bring up. Can you really say there's no God based on science alone? This question gets at, like, what are the limits of science? Can it actually prove or disprove something like God? What does NORMeOli say?
Well, NORMeOli uses that simulation theory we talked about. They say that science only works within the simulation itself. So it's great at explaining how the universe works, but not why. It can't tell us about the ultimate purpose or the creator. It's like science defines the rules of the game, but it can't tell us who designed the game.
So it acknowledges that science is important, but says it has limitations when it comes to these big existential questions. It kind of respects both scientific inquiry and that human need for something more.
Exactly. NORMeOli's not rejecting science at all. They're just saying it operates within a larger context. But would that convince a hardcore atheist who wants empirical evidence? It probably depends on the individual.
Okay, let's move on to another frequent atheist argument. How can God be all-knowing and yet not know how to create a world without evil? This one tackles the classic free will paradox. If God knows everything, our choice is already decided. And if so, how can we be responsible for our actions? How does NORMeOLi respond to this one?
This is where NORMeOLi gets pretty bold. They challenge some really fundamental ideas in theology. They say that God, while knowing every possibility, doesn't know for sure what choices each of us will make.
Oh, wow.
This keeps the idea of free will and personal responsibility intact.
It's an interesting way to try and reconcile the idea of a creator with free will, which is important to a lot of humanist philosophies, too.
Right, it's a common thread.
Do you think this argument would work on atheists who really value human agency and the idea that we're responsible for our actions?
Maybe. Especially for those who see predestination as unfair or just incompatible with a meaningful life. By saying that God doesn't predetermine our choices, NORMeOLi offers a way to bridge the gap between belief in God and the importance of human autonomy.
Okay, so we've looked at the atheist side. Now let's see how NORMeOLi deals with critiques from people who have more traditional religious interpretations.
All right, let's do it.
NORMeOLi doesn't hold back from critiquing those traditional views, even though they pull a lot from the New Testament.
Yeah.
One of the biggest disagreements is about atonement. The idea that Jesus died to take away our sins, NORMeOLi totally rejects that.
Yeah.
So how do they explain the point of Jesus' death then?
Okay, this is where NORMeOLi's interpretation gets really unique. They say that Jesus' death wasn't about paying for our sins, but it was the ultimate act of love from the Creator, like a testament to choosing love, even when facing incredible suffering. It's like the Creator saying, this is how much I love you, this is what love looks like.
Wow, it's a powerful way to look at it. It shifts the focus from salvation as this transaction to something that inspires us. Would people who have that traditional view of atonement be okay with this, though? I feel like this could be a problem for them.
Yeah, it's definitely different from what's usually taught. It might be hard for people who find comfort in the idea that Jesus took their sins away. But for people who struggle with the idea of a blood sacrifice, it might make more sense to them. And it might feel more ethical, too.
So we're seeing a pattern here. NORMeOLi consistently challenges both sides of the argument. But are they actually successful in making people doubt what they believe? That's a question we're going to keep exploring as we go deeper into their philosophy.
It definitely makes you think twice. And that's often how you start to change what you believe in, right?
Totally. Let's dig a little deeper into another area where NORMeOLi really goes against both the atheist and orthodox views, the concept of original sin.
Right.
We talked about how NORMeOLi says our sinful condition started before we were even on Earth. It's not from Adam and Eve, but from choices we made in a previous existence. How do people with traditional religious beliefs react to that?
It's a huge change from the usual interpretation.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, a lot of religions teach that we're messed up from birth because of what Adam and Eve did. But NORMeOLi throws that whole idea out the window.
So instead of inheriting sin, we're carrying around the consequences of our own past choices, even from before we were born. Does that make the concept more appealing to people who already believe in original sin?
It's hard to say. Some people might prefer it. It's like shifting the blame from some distant ancestor to, hey, this is my mess. But others might find it really unsettling. Like, wait a minute, you're saying there's a whole existence before this one. I don't buy it.
It definitely adds another layer to the whole debate. It's not just rejecting original sin. It's like NORMeOLi is reinterpreting it in a way that challenges everyone.
Yeah, atheists and traditional believers alike. It makes them both rethink their positions.
Okay, let's move on to another area where NORMeOLi's take sparks controversy, especially for more traditional believers. The nature of the devil.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one.
Forget about that whole image of the devil with horns and a pitchfork. NORMeOLi says Satan isn't some separate being. It's the influence and temptations to be selfish that's inside all of us. What does that mean for people who have a more orthodox view of the devil?
It's a big shift. It means that evil isn't some outside force working against us. It becomes an internal battle. It's about fighting against our own selfish desires, choosing love instead of giving in to our baser instincts.
So we're not fighting a demon out there. We're fighting the darkness within ourselves. It's a much more psychological and personal interpretation. But would people who believe in a literal devil be okay with this? The ones who think there's this powerful being actually tempting and tricking people?
It might be tough for those who find comfort in having someone to blame.
Yeah.
For all the bad stuff in the world.
Yeah.
But for those who have trouble understanding how a good God and a powerful evil being can both exist at the same time, it might actually make more sense. It's more relatable.
It puts the focus on taking responsibility for our own internal struggles. And that's a message you see in a lot of secular philosophies, too.
Exactly. It highlights that everyone deals with temptation and has to make choices between right and wrong. It's something we all have in common no matter what we believe.
Let's go back to NORMeOLi's big picture framework for a second, that simulation theory. It plays a huge role in how they respond to both atheist and religious criticism.
Absolutely.
We've talked about how NORMeOLi uses it to explain things like the limits of science and the existence of a creator. But how does it fit in with their answers to other common challenges, especially the ones about suffering and why the world seems so unfair?
This is where that idea of the simulation as a test comes in. That cosmic evaluation we were talking about. NORMeOLi says that all the bad stuff we go through, the suffering and injustice, it's all part of the evaluation. It's not that the creator doesn't care about our pain. It's that these challenges are actually necessary for the test to work.
So it's not about trying to avoid suffering or waiting for God to fix things. It's about proving ourselves by choosing love and showing our moral character, even when things are really hard.
That's it. And that's where this simulation theory might actually appeal to people who have trouble believing in a loving God when there's so much bad stuff happening in the world. It kind of explains how suffering can exist even if there's a good creator.
It's like saying the challenges you're facing aren't meant to punish you. They're here to test you, to make you stronger and help you grow. But how would atheists react to this idea? Would they find it convincing? Or is it just another way to justify suffering?
It's a tricky one. Atheists who don't believe in any kind of creator might see it as a way to avoid the issue altogether.
Right.
Like it's just a story to make people feel better about a world full of pain and injustice.
So it's probably not going to change the minds of people who completely reject the idea of a divine plan?
Probably not. But for people who are open to the possibility of a bigger purpose, even if they're not religious, it could give them a way to understand suffering as part of a process of growth and transformation.
It shifts the focus from, why is this happening to me? To, what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this experience?
Exactly. And that lines up with a lot of secular philosophies that talk about resilience, personal growth, and finding meaning in difficult times.
And it brings us right back to NORMeOLi's main message.
Yeah.
The importance of choosing love. It's the reason behind everything we do, the way we're measured in this cosmic simulation, and the key to reaching our full potential.
That's NORMeOLi in a nutshell.
So love is the ultimate goal. It's how we're judged in this cosmic simulation. But it's not just about feeling good. What does NORMeOLi say love actually looks like? How do we put it into practice?
NORMeOLi is really clear about this. It's all about recognizing that we're all connected. Like we're not just individuals competing with each other. We're part of something bigger, and everything we do affects everyone else.
You see that idea a lot in different spiritual and philosophical traditions?
Yeah, for sure.
We're all connected, so being loving actually benefits everyone, including ourselves. But how does that work in real life? Like when you're dealing with difficult people or tough ethical decisions?
NORMeOLi says compassion is a really important way to show love. It's about being understanding and kind, even to people who don't seem to deserve it. Because everyone's struggling with something,
It's about seeing past the surface and realizing that even the most challenging people are still human deep down. But let's be real. It's not always easy to act with love, especially when you're stressed out or tired, or dealing with people who just get under your skin.
Oh, yeah, I hear that.
How does NORMeOLi address that? Because it's a real struggle for a lot of us.
They get it. NORMeOLi knows it's not like you just flip a switch and become perfectly loving. It's a process. It takes time. We're going to mess up. We're going to be selfish sometimes. We're going to fall short. But the important thing is to be aware of it and try to do better.
So it's about recognizing when we've messed up and trying to make things right. Doing better next time. It's like this constant learning and growing, not about being perfectly loving all the time.
Exactly. It's about progress, not perfection. And that goes back to what we've been talking about with NORMeOLi's emphasis on personal responsibility. We can't blame other people for our own mistakes. We got to own our choices and work on being better.
It's a powerful message. And you see it in both religious and non-religious philosophies. It's all about the power of choice and the importance of trying to be good. Okay, but let's get back to the big question. Does NORMeOLi's philosophy, with that mix of reinterpreted Christianity and simulation theory, actually have the power to change people's deeply held beliefs? Can it make atheists and traditional believers question what they think they know?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Belief systems are really personal. They're tied up with our identities, our cultures, our emotional needs. What clicks for one person might totally turn off another person. But there are a few things NORMeOLi does that could at least make people think twice. Maybe even open up those beliefs a little bit.
Okay, I'm listening. What are those things? What makes NORMeOLi's approach so different, so thought-provoking?
First, they actually address the critiques from both sides. Both the atheists and the traditional believers. NORMeOLi doesn't avoid those tough questions about suffering and evil and the role of science and how to interpret the Bible. They face those questions head on and offer different ways to think about them.
So instead of just dismissing the other side's views, they acknowledge that the questions are valid and try to provide answers within their own framework.
Exactly. It's like they're inviting people into a conversation instead of just shutting them down. And that can be really powerful. It might make people who would normally just reject the whole thing actually stop and listen.
I see what you mean. Okay, what else?
Second, NORMeOLi blends familiar ideas with totally new ones, which can be both exciting and a little unsettling. They use a lot from the New Testament, which might draw in people who have a Christian background. But then they reinterpret those stories and ideas in ways that challenge the traditional interpretations.
It's like they're luring you in with something familiar and then bam, they hit you with a whole new perspective.
Yeah.
It can be kind of disorienting, but it also makes you think.
Totally. And lastly, there's the simulation theory. It's not something NORMeOLi invented, but it adds a whole other level of intrigue. It's an idea that's becoming more popular both in pop culture and in science. So people who are already questioning the nature of reality might find it really interesting.
It taps into that very human desire to figure out the big picture, to find meaning and purpose when the world feels so chaotic. And by putting the simulation theory into a spiritual context, NORMeOLi might actually bridge the gap between science and faith for people who have a hard time reconciling the two.
Exactly. It gives them a way to make sense of both the physical world and the spiritual realm within one big picture framework. Now, I don't think this means we're going to see a ton of atheists converting or a revolution in traditional religion.
Probably not.
But it's possible that NORMeOLi's ideas, by directly engaging with the other side, blending familiar and new concepts, and using this fascinating simulation theory, could make people question what they believe and re-examine those long-held beliefs.
It's a really interesting possibility, and it shows how important it is to challenge the status quo, even when it comes to our most deeply held beliefs.
For sure. Whether you agree with NORMeOLi or think they're way off base, there's no denying that they make you think about some fundamental questions about reality, consciousness, and what it all means.
And that's never a bad thing.
Not at all.
So to wrap up this deep dive into NORMeOLi's world, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to stay curious. Be open to new ideas and keep asking questions. Even about the things you think you know for sure.
NORMeOLi shows us that we can look at faith in new ways, bring together different viewpoints, and find meaning and purpose, even in a world that feels crazy and overwhelming.
And you never know. While you're grappling with these ideas, you might just discover something new about yourself, about the universe, and then about all the possibilities out there.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into NORMeOLi's thought-provoking ideas. We encourage you to check out their work and see what speaks to you. Until next time, keep diving deep.